welcome to the AT&T CyberThreat Report for September 29th, 2011. Today we have with us Jim Clausing. Jim is a malware analysis expert. Welcome, Jim. What do you have today for us?
Yeah, two things today, John. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about a report out of Denmark on how users on Windows are getting infected with malware. And then I want to talk a little bit about the story that's been in the press since early last week about a new exploit of SSL and TLS affecting secure web browsing.
All right, excellent. Also joining us today is Josh Lackey. Josh is a key member of our mobility threat awareness and response team. Welcome, Josh. What will you be discussing today?
I just have a couple simple things that enterprises should be doing to sort of protect themselves against, issues in SSL. Essentially, know your CA.
Right.
Simple but important things that people should be doing.
Okay, excellent. And also joining us today is Keith Epstein. Keith is an AT&T attorney who gives us counsel to ourselves and to the enterprise security team here at AT&T. He's also responsible for dumping out on me a lot whenever I say something wrong. Thanks for joining us, Keith. What do you have for us today?
Well, I can tell that you're all very excited, and I know with October just about on us, or by the time this show airs, it will be on us. You'll be thinking about Major League Baseball, the start of the hockey season, and National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So I'll be talking a little bit about that and a little bit about the administration's proposal for cybersecurity and safety online.
Okay, great. And I'm John Hogoboom. I'm a security analyst with AT&T, and I'm going to be our host for today. And I guess we'll kick it right off with Keith, who we just talked about. So what is going on here with the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month?
Well, every year for the last 8 years, October has been National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And there's no parade. As I was asked earlier, there are no costumes, although I suppose you can at the very end of the month celebrate National Cybersecurity Awareness with your Halloween costume. But it really is an effort by the Department of Homeland Security in cooperation with private industry to engage the public and the private sector to raise awareness and to educate Americans about the need to be safe online. And it's really a focus on improving the resiliency of the national infrastructure. So I invite you all to visit the Department of Homeland Security's website, where they have lots of really useful information, both about the efforts by private industry and things that individuals can do to enhance their security online. There's even some tip sheets that are downloadable that individuals may want to look at how to stay safe in a variety of online situations, such as social networking or gaming or email. And there's some tips for corporations, for enterprises, on ways they can secure their infrastructure. And it really is all part of the efforts by the government following 9/11 to enhance the critical infrastructure or the safety of the critical infrastructure in America. And this past May, the administration had proposed some cybersecurity legislation. And we're seeing literally dozens of draft bills sitting in both the House and the Senate that talk about cybersecurity in three areas. As part of the national cybersecurity awareness activities of the government, this May, the Obama administration proposed legislation to address three critical areas for cybersecurity. The first of those areas is the protection of critical infrastructure. And the objective is to strengthen privacy and protect the nation's infrastructure by providing the federal government with some oversight on the protection of that critical infrastructure. And what it would require is the development of a framework whereby operators of critical infrastructure, things like network operators, like the Tier 1 operators, and as well as other industries such as energy generation and distribution, will develop infrastructure protection proposals or frameworks to address cyber threats. And that framework will include not only the development of a plan by the network operator, but also some sort of mechanism by which the operators can share information about cyber threats as an advance warning. The idea is to create some flexibility for private industry to develop their own approaches, the government not wanting to mandate a particular approach, and to have the Department of Homeland Security work cooperatively with private industry to detect vulnerabilities and to get the word out about threats that are appearing. And of course, each of the plans would be developed by industry, partly based on the risks that those industries face, but they'll also be shared with the public, maybe not at the level of detail that increases the risk, but certainly at a level where the public will have some degree of confidence that that industry or that critical infrastructure is being protected.
Hey, Keith, this is Josh. Do you know if things like CAs are included, certificate authorities? I mean, you talked about Tier 1 network operators and, energy producers, but what about things like CAs? Because a lot of our, pretty much our privacy and a lot of our security on the net sort of depends on our certificates. And the last year or so, we've had a lot of issues with that. So do you know if this is included as critical infrastructure? Or?
No, I don't believe it is. And I think that brings up a good point. And the focus of critical infrastructure has for decades really been on the physical assets of the nation, those that are inherent or critical to national defense as well as to protection of commerce and to some extent protection of privacy. And whereas certificate authorities would be, I think, under the definition of necessary to protect privacy, necessary to protect commerce, I don't think they've ever been identified as critical infrastructure within the context of this infrastructure protection program. And I think that as the debate goes on, and certainly as we've seen some recent vulnerabilities, that will come up, and since it is a proposal at this point and there's been no specific legislation adopted, it very well could be part of that debate. Well, the hope is that the government will play a coordination role rather than impose mandates on the various sectors of that critical infrastructure. We also think that they have a role to play in auditing and assurance. So while we don't see them coming in with auditors, we do see them asking the right questions, being a clearinghouse for questions that are being asked, say, by individuals who are concerned with privacy or individuals who are concerned with protection of certain kinds of commercial communications. But we don't see them stepping in and mandating specific activities, which I think will be useful, since at least across the sectors, there's not going to be consistency, and even within the particular infrastructure sectors, there's probably not going to be as tight a consistency, so that each will have to develop their own capabilities.
Right.
Let me touch on two other items that are part of the National Cyber Security Infrastructure Plan. One is the protection. So the first is the critical infrastructure itself. The second is privacy. The interest in protection of infrastructure is also the interest in protection of the information that crosses that infrastructure. And there's always a tension between the interest of protecting commerce and the interest in protecting the security and that of protecting individual privacy. So the proposal from the administration is to involve civil liberty experts and others in developing a program that would strike a correct balance between the need for information in order to protect the critical infrastructure with the need for protection of civil liberties and the adoption of procedures that will protect individual privacy rights. And we've seen a number of bills already been introduced in the House and the Senate. They're working their way through their committees. There'll be some reconciliation between them, and more importantly, I think there's just been a lot of good debate about what privacy measures should be adopted and what the critical trade-offs are. All right. The last one, let me just wrap this up and then I'll take another question. But the last is the data breach notification law, which there is a proposal from the administration to convert from a 50-state, each with its individual set of requirements, notification requirements. And these notification requirements are in two parts. One, they may require notification of the individual's personally identifiable information that's been disclosed, but they also may require notification to the government. And today, each state, not every state, but most states have such laws, and the proposal is to standardize on one set of rules. And I think that's really good for business in that it allows us to standardize our operations, standardize our practices, and it eliminates a lot of confusion about trying to figure out how to deal with people from Arkansas as opposed to dealing with people from Nevada. Do you have any questions about those proposals?
Just to comment that uniformity makes life a whole lot simpler for corporations or anybody that does business across state lines. So that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good debate. The House and the Senate will be resuming discussion on several bills in October, so keep your eyes peeled. There'll be a lot in the news.
All right. I just want to make one quick point going back to the initial Cybersecurity Awareness Month thing, that I've used this as an opportunity for the last few years, to do an awareness thing with my parents. It's just a time to remind them, way to be safe online. And the National Cybersecurity Alliance has a website that they use during the Cybersecurity Awareness Month that's staysafeonline.org that has a lot of good tips for individuals. So I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I make it sound like it's all a DHS thing, and it really isn't. There are a number of organizations who are very active in the National Cybersecurity Awareness, of which we're participants and also observers. And it's really a industry and government cooperative effort. And no, there's no special hats that you wear or costumes or anything, but it's still an important exercise. And it's important for parents to sit down with their kids and kids to sit down with their parents and explain to them what the risks are online.
All right, great. All right, thanks, Keith. That was informative. I hope a lot of people check that website out, especially during the next month or even now. So the next thing that on the agenda here is really quickly, I just wanted to talk about Kelihos. Microsoft recently announced that they shut down Kelihos, and the way that they did this, they've recently done a few other botnet shutdowns. And I guess maybe to step back for a second, Kelihos is a botnet. It's basically a spam botnet, responsible for about 3.8 billion spams per day. There are only about 41,000, maybe a little bit more bots in this botnet. And it was actually derived, so we think, from the Waladak botnet. It shares a lot of code base with the Waladak botnet, which also was shut down a while back. Microsoft actually just this past week just finished shutting down the Rustock botnet and going through all the legal process with that one. But this week they added new signatures into their Microsoft software or malicious software removal tool, MSRT. And that's going to pick up and detect this Kelihos botnet and hopefully remove it from anybody who's got Windows machines that happen to be running MSRT, which most are, even though you might not see it running. And they also notified the domain, the botnet command and control domains that are used for Kelihos. They notified those registrars to shut down those registrations so that those domains no longer resolve. So that should have quite a bit of an impact in taking that one out. And I guess we'll see as time progresses here how that scales back. I haven't been able to put a chart together to see the botnet, how many bots are actually in the botnet still. But it just happened, within the past couple of days here. So this is a pretty new story.
Wasn't Waladak another botnet that Microsoft shut down?
Yes, I believe so. I don't remember the exact details. Do you remember, Jim, by any chance?
No, I don't remember the details on.
Okay, I think you're right. I know they definitely took down Rustock, which was another one, just recently. But they go, they go on these little runs where they find the ones that are, having the most malicious impact, and they try to hit the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, where they can get the most bang for their buck when they take it offline.
I was just wondering, because if they had taken down Wolodeck, and this was similar to Wolodeck, and it seemed like it's shared source code. I was just wondering if maybe you guys had details, like, did that make it easier for them to shut it down, or maybe but I don't know, maybe that's something we could look into next couple of weeks.
Now, this one, a couple of the antivirus companies, the security researchers, had managed to get into the command and control channel for this one, and that helped. They sinkholed some of the command and control, and then Microsoft is taking it out. So hopefully that'll this one completely off the air within a couple of days or a week.
Okay, and we did just look it up. Wolodeck was shut down, the original one, by Microsoft back in February 2010.
There's an interesting legal method used to do some of these shutdowns, which is they're taking control. They're bringing a suit against basically against the domain or against the IP address or against the server, rather than against the individuals. And the court then grants the individual the right to control it, and as a custodian, you can just pull the plug.
Right. Okay, and that's all I really wanted to say about that one. The next topic that we have is, Jim, you had something to tell us about how Windows machines get infected with malware, infection vectors.
Yeah, this was a story in the last couple of days out of Denmark. CSIS Security did a little survey. I don't remember exactly how long it ran. And basically their findings were that about 80% of the malware infections were the result of, in their study, and I think this was mostly users in Denmark, but it should apply pretty much universally, was through drive-by exploits on the web. So the statistics that are in these next two slides don't include the cases where somebody, clicks on a link in a phishing email or anything. This was primarily the drive-bys. And they did a little survey, and the first thing that they did was look at, and this was only Windows users. I don't have that slide in here, but it was only Windows users. And the majority of them were XP. Next highest number was Vista Windows 7. But basically, the most of the users were using Internet Explorer because that's the built-in browser in Windows. So 66% of the drive-by exploits where they were getting exploited, they were using IE, 21% were using Firefox. So basically this just shows that the majority of the users use what comes on the box, out of the box. The other interesting thing, though, was what additional piece of software were these drive-bys actually targeting. And this pretty much comes out to what we've come to understand over the last few years of watching this. A lot of Java exploits and the Adobe Acrobat Flash seem to be the high-profile targets. They've had a lot of vulnerabilities in the recent past, so those are the ones that the bad guys were going after. I don't know that there's a lot in the report that is really surprising, and they don't really make any suggestions on how to protect yourself any better. The big problem with drive-by exploits is you can get exploited by going to a legitimate site, but you've got some ad server that's been compromised, and you can still get nailed. So saying be careful where you browse doesn't necessarily really help a whole lot. But I thought it was interesting to see the applications that were being targeted, which are pretty much what I would have expected. I don't know about you guys, but pretty much what I've been seeing is the Javas, the Adobe applications, to some extent the browsers themselves, but we haven't seen nearly as many of those targeted directly against the browser in recent years.
Right. Yeah, I'm a little surprised by the Java one, but I don't know that in my malware analysis I've seen that many with Java. It's there every now and then. I definitely see the Adobe Reader, Adobe Flash exploits a lot, and Microsoft Internet Explorer, of course. A little surprised to see Windows Help in here, although I have seen there's some interesting vulnerabilities in there, but you don't see them very often that they actually target people with them. But there are some interesting vulnerabilities in the Windows Help format that you can get executables to run. You can put some payloads in there.
Hey, Jim, I know this is slightly off topic, almost directly off topic, but I'm just kind of curious. Are we seeing a growth in Apple-related exploits as well, sort of commensurate with, for the same applications, commensurate with Windows?
We're starting to see some of them, but mostly because of market share, the bad guys still go after the Windows stuff a lot more than they go after the Macs. Now lately we're seeing a lot more of we've talked about it a number of times, about going after the mobile devices, specifically the Android.
Mm-hmm.
And that's mostly because of market share. What there's the most of, that's the one they're going to go after, because that's where they'll get the most bang for the buck. So we have seen a number of, we haven't really talked about it on this show lately. Maybe we should in the next couple of weeks. In the last month or two, we've seen more malware targeting Macs than I've seen in probably the last several years.
I think Apple's finally got enough users. I mean, it's so popular now that I think it's starting to be tempting for these guys, and so I'm not at all surprised that we're starting to see more. I mean, just because they're based in Unix doesn't mean they're any safer really than things based on Windows.
We talked some about that in a previous show, but yeah, absolutely. It's when do they reach a critical mass that it's worth targeting them?
Plus, I don't think that the antivirus situation in the Mac world is quite as robust as it is in the Windows world. So if you can infect a Mac or something of that nature, you'll probably be able to keep that infection there for longer than you will in a Windows environment. That's just a guess.
Yeah, that's possible.
Okay, it was a good one. So let's move on. So, Josh, you had something to talk about related to SSL certificate authorities.
Yeah, and it's really just simple advice. It's know your certificate authority. So, for the last, we've had SSL for like 15 years, right? And over the last year, though, we've had a bunch of interesting breaks, and it all seems to have to do with certificate authorities. So essentially what a certificate authority is someone that introduces you to other websites or other authorities. So when you go to a website, you get a certificate, and the way you know that the certificate is owned by the place you think you're going to, it's signed by a certificate authority. And in your computer, every OS has one, both on your mobile phone, your Windows box, your Apple machine. They've all got this list of certificate authorities that they trust. And the question is, do you trust that list of certificate authorities?
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of details. I can't tell people how to go through this themselves. It's not difficult, but, you know, do some searches on the net. You can figure out how to list the certificate authorities you trust. But you'll go in there, and I've audited my own just to see what was there, and you find, like, these countries that you don't think, why am I trusting these different countries, you know? And so I'm not saying there's something untrustworthy about these different countries. I'm just sort of wondering why I trust them by default. So certainly for enterprises, it really makes sense to go through your IT department, your security specialists in the IT department should go ahead and audit those. And frankly, if there's certificate authorities that you guys probably don't use that frequently, remove them. The worst that's going to happen is your browser is going to say, you know, oh my gosh, I don't recognize this authority. Are you sure you want to go? You know, I don't recognize this certificate. Are you sure you want to go to this site? And so it could look a little scary for your end users, but, you know, as long as you're removing ones that either you don't use or aren't used that frequently, it's not, you know, I think it's better, because otherwise you have this list of certificate authorities that if something happens to them, or if they do something malicious on their own, not saying that they would, but it's certainly a possibility with insider threat and everything, all of a sudden your privacy and your data security are you know, wide open for attack. So I think it's just, you know, this was good advice for a long time, but over the last year, all of a sudden, it's actually timely advice now as well. So definitely for enterprises. And for more security-savvy end users as well. I don't think I'd tell my mother to audit her certificate authorities, and I don't know, for example, if you could even do it like on the iPhone. Can I remove a certificate authority from my iPhone without hacking root on it? So I'm not positive. But it's definitely something to look into, and certainly something enterprises should be aware of.
Yeah, that's one of the big issues that got me concerned with the recent break-ins at some of the CAs in the last 6 months is just the enormous number of root CAs that we're supposed to trust out there. And, you know, there are a couple hundred of them. I don't know anything about most of them. So but that's just an issue with the whole infrastructure, and I'm not sure that we're going to solve that very quickly, but it's something.
No, I agree. I don't think we can solve it sort of universally, but I think each company can sort of take in, you know, examine it for themselves. Like, for example, DigiNotar. I can't think of any reason why I should be trusting DigiNotar. I mean, I can think of people like, in the Netherlands, they probably should keep it on their list. Well, probably they shouldn't, but, you know, beforehand, you know, before we heard they got broken into, they probably should have. But, you know, and then we go back to the law. We're talking about critical infrastructure earlier. I mean, it seems to me that there should be some, you know, pretty strict procedures and processes and some checks and balances to make sure that these certificate authorities just aren't being broken into. I've heard horror stories of, you know, over the last year, some certificate authorities have started auditing what's gone on in their networks, and it's, you know, they hadn't been broken into once, but it was like 4 times, and they find evidence of break-ins from like years ago where they, you know, there's like evidence lying around, and they've been broken into for years. Right, and they're just now sort of finding out about it. So, you know, it's important. I'm tempted to say our web of trust is broken, right? SSL is broken, but you know, I think that's going a bit far. But certainly it's something that needs to really be looked at. You know,
and it's certainly something people need to be knowledgeable about, and we need to raise awareness about it.
Yeah, and I would say, coming full circle here, if you are, I think it's a good idea to audit your CAs that you trust. If you do remove some, you need to send your end users to the National Cybersecurity website at the DHS to get some end user education out there, not to just click through the warning message and just trust that SSL website anymore. They do get it. But yeah, that's a good topic for discussion and something that enterprises should look into. So, Jim, we have another topic from you about Beast, SSL TLS hack that came out recently in the news. What do you know about that? What can you tell us?
Yeah, and this one hit the press last week, and there was a paper that was released on Friday, a talk that was given at a conference last Friday, where they finally came out with the details. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of technical detail because we don't have the time, and our viewers aren't all math geeks. But the interesting thing was that the actual vulnerability was discovered 10 years ago. It was discovered in 2001. It was found in SSH and IPsec, and was fixed in both of those a number of years ago. And the issue had to do with being able to do a chosen plain text crypto attack against encryption algorithms that were running in CBC mode, cipher block chaining mode. And it threw up a little diagram of what CBC mode is, and I don't really care that you understand that. But the point here is that if somebody was able to guess the initialization vector and was able to somehow get somebody to encrypt text that they knew, they would then be able to decrypt part of it. Basically, what this means in the context of this attack is that a couple of guys in the last 8-9 months figured out how to do a cross-site scripting type of attack against web browsers that would allow them to decrypt some of the SSL traffic and potentially steal session keys or other information that was included in the SSL communication. It turns out when they discovered this attack 10 years ago, they figured out a fairly simple way to protect against it, and that protection was implemented in TLS 1.1 and 1.2, but it wasn't implemented universally. It's in the OpenSSL libraries, but it's turned off by default because it broke Internet Explorer 6. So basically, but what we've discovered here is if you can go to TLS 1.1 or 1.2, you're protected against this particular vulnerability. You need to enable that both in the browser and in the web servers. So the Thierry Zoller, a security researcher in Luxembourg, has put together this table of which browsers or OSs support which versions of SSL and TLS. Essentially, TLS is SSL version 3. SSL was originally developed by Netscape back in 1994, and when they ceased to exist, they turned over the standardization of TLS to the IETF. Standardization of the SSL, and they renamed it TLS, more or less. So what this chart here at the top shows is that the NSS library, which is essentially Mozilla, Firefox, and similar browsers, currently doesn't support TLS 1.1 or 1.2. This is a little bit of a problem. S-channel is the encryption libraries built into Windows, and just this week, Microsoft said they're going to, and they may have actually pushed the patch already. TLS 1.1 was available in IE 7, 8, 9, but it wasn't turned on by default. The patch that is going to come out, if it hasn't already, is going to turn it on. Some of the alternate browsers do handle TLS 1.1, 1.2. Some of them, Safari doesn't yet. One of the other temporary workarounds that's been suggested is switching from the CBC, the block cipher encryption, to a stream cipher, and RC4 is the one that's been suggested for that.
So what does this mean to like the average user or the enterprise user? What do they need to do, and what's the likelihood that they would actually have this kind of attack, committed against them, where someone would be able to decrypt their communication?
Yeah, that's the interesting question. Like I said, the attack's been known for 10 years, but in the context of SSL, it was believed to be too difficult to actually exploit. So the big thing that this finding from last week is there's proof of concept code out there that shows how it can actually be exploited.
Did they release that code publicly? So can any sort of bad guy pick up this code at this point?
It was out there for a while, so I'm sure it's in the hands of the bad guys. It's been taken down from the site where it was initially posted, because I was going to go grab a copy of it this afternoon before we started recording, and it was gone by then. But the issues as far as users and enterprises are concerned is to protect against it, you have to make changes at both the web server and the browser side. You've got to prefer the encryption algorithms that aren't subject to this particular attack, either RC4 if you're going to be stuck with TLS 1.0, or switch to TLS 1.1, 1.2. And not all of the browsers support it. Not all of the web servers support it. The last slide I had here shows the web servers, and IIS 6 doesn't support TLS 1.1. Mod SSL, which is one of the ways of implementing SSL in Apache, doesn't support 1.1. So there's work that needs to be done on both sides to protect against it. How likely is it? It's not easy, but now that that proof of concept code is out there, it's not as hard as it was. Now people can just steal the code. It does require some other sorts of cross-site scripting type attacks to get the code running inside the browser, but we see a lot of those succeed on a regular basis. So it's probably not time to panic, but it is time to start, pressuring folks to move to the more recent. TLS 1.1 has been a standard since 2006. Still not implemented in Firefox and in Mod SSL and Apache, mostly because the developers didn't see a lot of people screaming for it. Now, as a result of this, hopefully we'll see that them implemented and so we won't be vulnerable to this in the future. But yeah, I just wanted to bring it up. We've seen some patches, and we will see patches coming out from vendors to try to address this.
All right.
So I'm just still trying to wrap my head around the severity of this attack. What could you maybe walk through, like something a bad guy could do with this? I mean, so yes, we have to have a cross-site scripting, and you can decrypt a little bit of the first part of the packet. What can a bad guy do with this?
Well, potentially he could steal session cookies, session keys to be able to log into websites as a user and steal banking information, that kind of stuff.
So we just went through this huge fire sheep thing, not too many months ago, where a lot of these sites didn't have SSL by default, and then you could just run this fire sheep program that would steal cookies and allow you to break in to all sorts of people's accounts. So now it sounds kind of like it's almost like this revisited, but now SSL doesn't matter anymore. It's like, okay, now everything's by default SSL. It's like, well, we can still upgrade Firesheep now, and we can still steal your cookies and still steal your accounts. I mean, maybe it's not quite as bad because you need the cross-site scripting.
Yeah. It's not quite as easy to do as the Firesheep was, but
although Firesheep was sniffing on a local network, right? So if you were sniffing on like a Wi-Fi hotspot and you see these connections going through and you know the IV and you know the initial bytes, it almost sounds like this is Firesheep all over again.
Well, no, except that to be able to get to the attack to work, you've got to be able to run code inside the browser. You need, and they have found a couple of different methods to do it, but the initial one was a Java thing. There's a Silverlight, so it's a little more difficult to do, and that's why I don't think we'll see a whole lot of malware actually taking advantage of it real soon. But attacks only get better; they never get worse. So now that this is out there, hopefully the vendors will make some progress and implement the versions of the protocols that protect against it.
So. All right. Okay. Well, thanks for that update and info. Hopefully the vendors on both sides will, get their act together and update their software to support at least TLS 1.1 or 1.2 if they can. So at this point, we're up to the Internet Weather Report, which we all love, our favorite section. And let's see what we have here today. A lot of repeated stories. So we have TCP destination port 5631 up at the top here. Talked about that last week. And if we go, let's just look at that chart really quickly here. This is Semantic PC Anywhere. PC Anywhere is a remote control type of program, a lot like VNC or Remote Desktop Protocol, which is Microsoft's product. There's probably some other ones out there that I'm forgetting. We've seen only a very small number of sources from China. It's just a small handful of them, really. But they're pretty aggressively scanning. They had a big spike here earlier in the week, or maybe it was over the weekend, I guess it was. And or maybe whenever it was, Monday or something like that. The interesting thing that I noticed is we actually have had an abrupt stop overnight. Right around midnight, all of that activity stopped. Probably because it's only a handful of sources. I don't think that this is botnet motivated. I think this is probably a small number of people selectively doing it with their machines, looking for vulnerable hosts, but they're just doing a lot of that scanning. So that's not to say to put your guard down and let your port 5631 TCP PC Anywhere machines all back out into the internet. Please firewall them if you can, and only allow hosts you are expecting to connect to them to connect to them. But that's what's going on there. I expect we'll probably, as you can see here, we kind of had some lulls in activity for maybe a week at a time. and then periodic scans would happen for a couple of days up to a week and then go away again, et cetera. So I expect we'll probably see more of this come back again. Next one we had, this is kind of a non-event, UDP destination port 5060. We're seeing an increase in volume, and when we actually look at the chart, I took a look at this one. It's actually not that dramatic. So we are getting an increase in volume. What we're seeing is an upward trend here, which I kind of denoted, and our systems are detecting that upward trend and that it keeps increasing a little bit over time. When I actually looked into this, this looks like legitimate traffic to me from a VoIP provider. I can tell that that's the case here. I don't think it's malicious in nature. I think they're just doing more business is probably what's happening here. But I could be wrong, so we'll see as time goes on here. But in any event, that's why that one's showing up on the chart here. The next one we have, this is a little bit of a mystery. Well, one I'm not going to go over, UDP destination port 1434. That's Microsoft SQL Server. Brian covered that last week. We do see periodic scanning on that. So the SQL Slammer worm was infamous one that scanned on that port. There's nothing new really to report there since last week. We're just still seeing periodic scanning. I don't think it's related to SQL Slammer. It's probably another type of activity related to that, but just something to be aware of. UDP destination port 22292. Now, I think, and I didn't go back to last week's show, but I think Brian might have mentioned this last week. This one's interesting because last week would have been probably about, somewhere in here maybe it was last week. And we could see that we have had gone from a noise floor of nothing to a very gradual increase in traffic here. And it's actually, this is the number of scan tips per hour. And that means that's how many hosts are actually scanning, not the number of actual scan flows, but how many hosts. This kind of activity where it's increasing like this, we're also seeing a diurnal pattern where you see peaks and valleys. Those machines are coming up and down offline over the course of a day. This might be botnet related. I don't really know what this port is. I don't remember if we actually discussed it. A lot of times these ports end up being related to some kind of peer-to-peer type software. It might not be in this case, but it's interesting that we've gone from nothing to a gradual, actually it's a pretty dramatic increase, an upward hill climb it's taking. That makes me suspicious because we're seeing more and more hosts joining in on this activity, but we don't know why yet. It's not a large number of hosts. We're only seeing hundreds of hosts at the most. In reality, it's probably, if you look at the entire internet, it's probably 1,000 or so. But this is just our slice of the pie on the AT&T backbone that we're looking at here. So that's one to keep an eye out for. Not sure what it is just yet. Stay tuned. Hopefully we'll be able to figure out what that is. I think the last one that I had that I wanted to talk about, I will show you a chart on these. TCP destination port 23 and 22. That's Telnet and SSH. We've talked about this frequently over the past few weeks. And this is that activity. Now you'll notice we had a big run of this activity back in July, and it's kind of been dramatically toning down here. It's still significant enough that that it's triggering alarms on our side that we want to keep an eye on it. As we reported before, the majority of the sources here are coming from Korea. I believe they've been notified of this activity as well. I don't believe it's really, well, maybe it has had an impact. We should go back and see when they were notified of all of their scan sources engaging in this activity. I do believe it's related to botnet activity, just because the numbers of sources here are pretty large. We're talking about 15,000 at the peak here, which is probably larger than that in reality. They're also doing it in a coordinated way, the way they're scanning. They're scanning sequential address blocks. They're doing it, together as kind of a unified force. So I think we also, and I need to go back into my notes, but I think we might have an indicator as one of the botnets that we know of that is scanning on these ports. I don't know if it's attributed to all of this activity, but it's at least some of it. I'll need to go back into my notes, but I didn't get a chance to put that together for this show. The last ones we had, some of these other ones, not quite sure on the UDP destination port 8090. TCP destination port 53 could be anything. That's probably it's DNS-related activity for the most part, I would guess. Not sure what's really happening there. We've got some send-mail stuff happening here, SMTP, TCP destination port 25. And then the last one that's way at the bottom here is an oldie but a goodie, TCP destination port 2967. Anybody who's been around for a while knows that this was a semantic antivirus vulnerability in their application software that they had on the endpoint client. Allowed machines, I don't remember exactly what its purpose was, but you could exploit a vulnerability by connecting into a workstation that had the semantic antivirus product running on it. It's since been patched. But, as we know, there's lots of machines out there that come shipped with default antivirus provided by, whatever vendor they buy it from, Dell or Gateway or whoever. So sometimes those don't get updated and they're still out there.
Yeah, this is actually one that it amazes me. This vulnerability was patched 5 years ago or more, and still in the honeypots. I see scans for this every day.
Yep. It's like one of those standbys they're always scanning for, just in case it's still there. Somebody's got it. Okay, so that was all we really had to cover for today. Just a reminder, if you have questions or feedback, feel free to contact us. The email address is cyberthreat@list.att.com. This program is available on the AT&T Tech Channel website, which is techchannel.att.com. And it's also available as a podcast on iTunes, and you can just search for AT&T Cyber Threat Report. And we also have it on YouTube. Just search for AT&T Cyber Threat Report there as well, and you should be able to find any of our videos for the Cyber Threat Report. Again, thanks to Jim, Josh, Keith, and I'm John Hogoboom. Stay safe and happy computing.